Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased. Joining me from the US, Tamara Laine. She's the founder of MPWR, and we're gonna
Empower.
talk Empower. Yeah, uh, thank you for correcting me, Tamara. So, usually the audience knows that I don't steal much from my guests' time. We try to give them as much time as possible. So, Tamara, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, your background, and you have a very interesting background, by the way. We're gonna talk a little bit about that also as well. And explain to us what you're currently doing, what's Empower, and then we can start discussion from there. A teaser for the audience. We're gonna talk about, I think it's been a while since I discussed this topic with one of my guests. We're gonna talk about, everything from credit, from a little bit about the AI part of it. Of course, not on the technical side, and we're gonna talk also about how we can keep it human centered when it comes to fintech. So, without further ado, Tamara, thank you for joining me today. The floor is
Yeah.
yours.
Thank you for having me. So, just so that I introduce myself to everybody here who's listening, my name is Tamara Laine, and I'm the CEO and founder of Empower. And at Empower, we're designing the agentic ecosystem for lending. And why we're doing this is because we know that the financial system really is exceptionally leaning towards those who have great credit, those who have credit over 730, 750, and above. And what we know is globally that most people over 50% have under that score, and not because they aren't credit worthy, but because we don't understand them. Because the new economy has a different way of spending, has a different way of paying for their homes that they live in, whether they rent, whether they share, whether they're nomadic. And they have new ways of interacting with the financial system. Maybe it's smaller loans for shorter times. And so, what we're doing in Empower is we're creating the agentic and AI underlying business intelligence so that we can bank those that are underserved, so that we can lend to those that are underserved and thin filed. And we're really excited about it because we're AI native and we are able to move quickly.
Great. And thank you again, Tamara, for being here with me today. Now, something which immediately kind of attracted, my attention. You worked in journalism before starting this,
Yeah.
and you shifted to be a founder. So there must be a moment where you faced a problem, or maybe someone faced the problem, and then you said, "Okay, there is an opportunity here. I need to do that." I'm always curious to know about these leaps that happen to founders coming from different backgrounds. What was that moment for you, Tamara?
Yeah, well, this is my second company that I founded. The first, I was part of a founding team that launched a live selling shopping platform. And when I fell in love with startups and the 0 to 1 process, I advise other companies on 0 to 1. And so when I thought about what is the next problem that I want to tackle, I knew that I wanted it to be a large challenge, one that I could throw myself into, that I was incredibly passionate about, that I knew was hard, and that people shied away from tackling because of how big it was and how maybe intrinsic in the system it was. Because I have always been about systems change. And so one of the reasons why I decided to do this was I had been working with a company, talking to banks, talking to small businesses that were facing troubles trying to access credit. And I heard them, and it really struck a chord with me personally as a gig worker for over half of my career, as a freelance journalist, as a freelance writer, then a fractional CXO in the later half of my career. I understood the hardships of the financial services that you're trying to get. And so I said, there's got to be a way to solve this. And the journalist hat came on, where I dug in on the research and talking to people and reading everything that I could, listening to people's stories, and then looking at how the technology could solve this. And I thought this is the perfect moment for technology to step in and reimagine a system that is incredibly, set up in the 1950s, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, people might underestimate the problem here, and I want to dig more into this. So, credit scores, and I think I'm not sure if I can claim this, but I would say majority of the countries they have them. Here in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, where I am, like they implemented them like immediately after the 2008 2009 crisis. So everyone is familiar. At least I know about credit scores. Now, what we often hear is that they say these scores are data driven. Yet we know for a fact that actually it doesn't have all the pictures.
Yeah.
So what kind of data exactly? So you give some examples from someone working in the gig economy. What else is missing there, Tamara, from your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's some things that aren't necessarily new in the idea of bringing in new data to credit, which are like big things are rent history, right? Utilities, behavioral data, cash flow analysis, right? That we can now do instantly with attaching bank accounts. So those things for and they're called alternative data still, not primary data, which they should be because that shows the whole picture of someone. So kind of the traditional credit scores are really based on your liabilities versus how much credit you have open and if you've had any defaults or how many loans you have active, right? Like it's kind of really based on how much credit you've accrued, right? If you're a young person and you're trying to get your first house, but you've decided that you didn't want credit cards because you wanted to pay everything off, that's a huge, huge problem. And you're not able to get something because you haven't built up that history. So it doesn't mean you're not credit worthy. It means we don't understand you at the moment, right? And so with alternative data and like the data that we can get from someone's behavior, especially with banking transactions, utility payments, all of these different things that kind of, show that you are able to handle money. We're able to get a much, much better picture. And there's some very cool alternative credit data sets that are popping up now that have to do with like um, community banking. And by that, I mean, a lot of times people will do like community banks that are not banks, right? They'll pool their money together and
Hmm.
they'll do things where they give people loans or they buy certain things for the community. And so there are actually people, and this is a hard thing to track, that are starting to create technology to track that, and then that data can feed into the alternative sets. And that's really starting to bank and give loans to the underbanked. So we're on the brink of some really cool ways of gauging people's behavior that were never done before.
Right. Tamara, I gotta ask you, and sorry if it's gonna be kind of a loaded question. So now, um, there's
Like loaded questions. Go for it.
yeah. So two things here, and actually, this question I didn't prepare for it, but based on what you were describing now, one of the biggest problem I hear from people, especially when they change country, and I know a lot of people who
Newly
mi-
arrived.
migrated from somewhere, maybe to the US, or maybe they came from the US, they went to Australia, from Australia to Singapore, and so on. So the biggest problem I always hear from people like, hey, like we don't have credit score, and this is why we cannot do anything, right? Can we imagine this also to be able to solve this problem? Because now you have, quote unquote, correct me if I'm using the right terms, it's kind of your financial identity, same as you carry your passport. So you can carry that with you to any country you go, and then based on it, you can have some assessment of your financial situation.
Yeah.
Now, yet, and this is why it's a loaded question, someone might argue that yeah, I can understand where you're coming from, but we as financial institutions, like we work, majority of the time they spend their times in assessing risks. And sorry, like I need to do this in the legacy way, in the traditional way. This doesn't work for me. So in all this, how we can change the mindset here, Tamara, for like this, if I might call it inclusivity, especially for people who change places a lot, or maybe they have this, as you mentioned, the way that they rely on gigs sometime, or maybe advisory work, fractional work. So how we can change also the mindset to become really a global movement rather than just solving a problem or a pain on a smaller scale.
Well, you're right. So that is a loaded question because so this is on my roadmap is to become I call it credit IP so that you can
Hmm.
carry your own credit IP and you can basically tokenize it out instead of vice versa, which is now you've got all these different agencies that own your credit and someone pulls it from different places and you don't really know what information people are getting on you based on what bureau, right? Like it should be the opposite, which is you're able to really hone, understand, nurture your own credit and own your credit IP. And so that's something that we have right now is we're working towards our credit IP. Now, what you asked is how do we make it global, which is something that we are looking at, not in our first version because we are launching in the US, but as we move forward, that isn't just an institutional problem of will banks accept it. It's actually a regulatory problem as well. And so what that is and how you'd have to, start to approach it is each country mandates what can happen with financial data and where it can go, right? And so, in order to have that sort of system, you have to be able to either have like bases set up in each country, right? And again, depending on the regulations, whether it's regional, because some places have regional bank financial information regulations. Some countries have by country. So you would really have to be like all over the world, understanding where data can live and flow and that is really the problem with having some sort of global system like that. I've heard of some very interesting solutions on blockchain, but blockchain, is also very far from being kind of adopted in that way with financial institutions. So th- there is a solution. It's not necessarily technical right now because the technology, I believe, is there. It's a regulatory and infrastructure issue that really is going to be the challenge when tackling that sort of problem. In my
That's, you know,
quick opinion answer.
no, no, that's fantastic. That's great. Now, let me ask you also something, kind of a follow-up question. Now, you mentioned before that you look at different type of data, which is mainly the behavioral data, right? So, um, rather than the fixed data points that usually the traditional systems would do.
We look at all.
Now, yeah,
Yeah, we
and yeah, so and also like I believe in the world of AI, so maybe some models are doing the nitty gritty here to give you kind of an idea about what kind of credit is this person we can give them and so on, and maybe the model will come and say, hey, like even based on this data that you gave me, I don't think this person is maybe trustworthy, or we think there are risks and so on. Now, I talk a lot with my guests, and actually, I learned this from my guests. It's not, and I started to search for it about the idea of how we can explain the results of these models to people, which we call it explainability, right?
Mhm.
um I discussed this with people in HR, people in different verticals, and we talk about the AI. People see it as the black box, and usually people, they are a little bit kind of, I would say, skeptical about black boxes, because they say, hey, because by the way, even in the traditional way, we know that they are using kind of machine learning, and but it looks at certain data and say, hey, we think like we can give you a loan, we can give you a credit card, you can get a mortgage and so on. So in your case, Tamara, do you, I'm not sure if you implemented or do you plan to implement kind of explainability? So me, when I come to you and you tell me, hey, Mehmet, yes, we can, we cannot, we don't think like you can have a credit card or whatever that is because one, two, three.
So actually, I think AI makes that easier and better. So if you look at your credit right now, and you pull your credit report, the explainability is actually pretty bad, right? It'll be like, I actually just pulled my credit report the other day, and it was like, you have multiple accounts open, and your payments versus your credit limit is moderate, right? And you're just kind of like, oh, what does that mean? Like I don't know, like, it doesn't give me anything tangible, right? And so with AI, and actually what we've set up, which is very cool, is when you get your feedback, it gives you the bullet points exactly why. What was the thinking that went into it? So is it that you have 3 missed car payments? Or is it that you've paid back your phone bill every, time for 2 years perfectly on time? Like it will give you 5 to 7 bullet points of why that decision was made. And so then you've got some real traction, the like, what can you do? Whether if it's great, then fantastic. If it's not great, then you're going to see like, here's the decision that went into it. And so these are what you need to proactively work on in order to up your score um, and get a better rate. So that is given to you almost instantaneously when you apply because through AI, we can do it fast and the decision logic is there, right? It's so trackable. You can watch AI make the decision based on the parameters that you give it.
Right. Now, one point about, and, and I know the answer, but this is for the audience, Tamara. When we are collecting a lot of data, and we're some people, especially I know in some geographies, sometime in even some areas of the world, they would see it as kind of, hey, are you doing a surveillance on me, and are you watching my behavior? And we heard a lot of debate about these central banks control things, the CBDCs and all this, and that you know the central bank might decide like, hey, based on your spendings today, like you can buy an extra, I don't know, ice cream because you consumed your credit, your emission score limit for today, and so on. So people are usually again skeptical about sharing this information. So where is the line between keeping this without the surveillance and actually getting the benefit out of it?
I mean, such a great question. And that's also a loaded question, right? Because you're going to talk about difference in geographies. That's a like a public policy question because what you hope and I look at ethical AI. I've done a
Hmm.
lot of work in ethical AI. And so what the hope is that engineers and startup founders that are working in AI are doing so in an ethical way with a code of conduct, with code of ethics, right? Working within regulatory sets, and you hope that your regulatory sets are really good so that people know what lines you can and can't cross. And so that you can create technology that's human centered, that helps people thrive, not to create more of a surveillance state. Now, the thing is, with technology, the genie is out of the bottle, right? Technology
Yes.
is moving fast. So that's why um, good regulatory systems are important so that founders know how to create and within what parameters. Now, with that, what you're kind of talking about is the boundary of crossing that line. When you think of surveillance states, you usually think of government. It can be corporate surveillance states, right? Like you do have some monopolies that control all the data, and then that can really control different things with what you see, how you purchase, how you shop, because if you're only seeing certain things, then your behavior reacts to that. And so that sort of monopoly. So you try and keep monopolies out of the system. But how can we, you know, uh, your question, I think, is will people be receptive? And I think
Hmm.
right now, adoption rates for AI, I was just looking at this, if somewhere in like 90% of Americans have used AI, but that's like chat GPT. And then I think it's something around 40% are skeptical of AI. I shouldn't check these facts again, but um, and so you've got this real kind of like curve right now that's happening where like a lot of people are using it, but you still have a large portion that are skeptical, but that skepticalness is going down, 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 down super quick. And so that means the adoption of it is going to radically increase in the next few years. Um, so people are using it. You need the regulations in place to make sure that it's safe and secure. You need to make sure that there's not monopolies in place to so that there's kind of freedom of thought. And then you want to ensure that, like, especially with the government that the data is owned by the people, not by other people.
Right. To your point, I think, yeah, I repeated this a lot of time. The genie is out of the bottle,
Right.
indeed, and there's no way to get it back anytime. Um, for me, and like just kind of food for thoughts, that they say. Like for me, regulations are necessary, but should not be blockers.
Yeah.
Also, as well, and when such discussions comes up, Tamara, with me, what I tell people, like, hey, like sometimes people complain, hey, like for example, like this. Let me mention it. Like Google, they know a lot of about us, da 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 da. And said, yeah, but actually they didn't force you to do that, because if you read, all the terms and conditions and all the disclaimers, when you use a service, right? So you, like, yeah, they know you the history that you're doing, and actually no one forced you to do that. And let's be honest, it actually simplified your life. So
Well,
if you
it's the
want
old
to think.
saying, nothing is free, right? If it's
Exactly.
free, then you're the product. If you're paying, then you're paying for a product.
Absolutely. And then I tell people, like, look, at the end of the day, it's your choice. If you don't want to be part of this, I don't think someone would go and extract the data and put it in a model unless you accept for it. And this is why I think, the awareness becomes, critical here. Now, this is why, my opinion, I'm not sure if you share that with me, Tamara, like regulations are not and should not be at any time blocker um, for AI driven credit systems. Let's say this, right?
So I agree and disagree at the same time, and I'm in a very, regulated space. So ambiguity can also kill,
Mm,
uh progress, right? And so if you have ambiguity, investors are less likely to invest in startups
right.
because they because they don't they you know they're going to wait to see what happens, right? Investors help drive innovation. And if you are building something and you don't know the regulatory status of what will be in each state, let's just say, then your ability to scale quickly is hampered. So, yes, overbearing regulations are bad. Ambiguity is also a innovation killer. So you have to have kind of decisive frameworks that startups and companies can work within in order for there to be really good growth.
Right. And I think this is where, and this is like, I'm trying to relate my thoughts, and the way you're putting that to us, Tamara. Whenever we see, and again, I had an episode a couple of weeks back with Nat Natrajan from Global Partners, and whenever we keep kind of a human in the loop, we call it this way, and that's why, you know here we call it like human centered fintech, let's call it
Yep.
this way, right? This might, remove the skepticism from one part. You have the control of a human, that actually nothing wrong is happening. The question here is, in a system like what you're doing, Tamara, like how that works from a design perspective, not from technology perspective. How do you design it in a way that it let everyone feels that they are, really, of course, there is an AI working in the background, but at the same time, it shows that you are inclusive. Like you're not just running data by a model and relying 100% on the model. Why? Because someone might go and say, yeah, but these models, they have the hallucination, they can do mistakes. It's a machine at the end of the day. So how we make this, human centered?
Well, the human in the loop, I think, is the important part, what you said. So one, human in the loop, and two, it's I think the outcomes that you're driving towards, right? With inclusivity and transparency. And so when you're making it so that it betters someone's life, and that's an outcome, that that is better than making it for you think That's a really hard question because I was going to say productivity, but productivity is also, good for human flourishing and thriving, right? If you can take away mundane tasks and allow people to do things that are more mentally stimulating, then that's good. So, how do we, the question is, how do we create something that's good? I got sidetracked from the question.
Yeah, I like to see the way you think about it from someone also, because remember when you said in the introduction, like you were doing things and you saw the problem, and because for me, like even if I'm technology guy, I always have this. Sometimes they tell me, hey, it's not related to credit necessarily. Like we checked in the computer and the computer said this, and they said, okay, but the computer is not a holy book, right? Like it might go and do something. And I always appreciate any system, whatever the goal of it, whether it's like something financial, something, just a service. If someone can explain to me these things, and at least I can understand like why the machine took this. Again, we talked about it before, but I mean, I appreciate if a human can explain that to me, although like I know how machines work, I know how the algorithms work. So this is to not feel, because some people might go and say, yeah, like maybe the model is biased, right? Like maybe based on, I don't know, the state I'm coming from, or the city, or whatever, age, race, all these things can come together, and it's a very sensitive topic, right? And the feeling that, okay, we there is always a human who can explain is important, from my perspective at least.
So let me open this up into a bigger question. So here's what we wrestle with, because I think it's very easy to say, okay, what I said before, which is you really try and make it for humans first, and you keep a human in the loop, and you think, and here's what we want to do. I think what's just as important as thinking about what you'd like to accomplish and the outcomes is trying to figure out what the unintended consequences are. And so why I say that. So if we look at businesses that had the best intentions over some of the years, have actually done some great harm as well, not intentionally. And so how do you try and find those unintentional consequences before they happen? So for example, great case study, Tom's, the shoe company. Tom's the shoe company? Or if you don't,
Yeah.
so Tom's the shoe company, I think their model was buy a pair, they give a pair to someone who doesn't have shoes, right? In
Mhm.
the global South. And so they were giving a lot of shoes in South America. What happened was they put a lot of shoemakers out of business
Yep.
because there were so many shoes down there. So great intentions. Okay, we're giving shoes to people who weren't able to afford it. But what happened was they put a whole economy, or sorry, a whole industry out of business. And so then they had to adjust their model. So the intentions were great. What happened was not so great. So how do you try and think ahead about what those unintentional consequences are? So now in AI, a very good example is, let's just say, in healthcare, being able to identify the probability of someone's success rate on a medication, right? And so then you say, okay, well, let's just say we have so much medication, we've got a limited quantity of medication, and we're going to use AI to discover the probability of someone's success. On one hand, that's great because you're identifying, okay, well, we think that this group of people is going to have a lot of success on this. The unintended consequences are you're actually limiting the ability for a group of people to try that product, right? And we don't know how the body works. They could be successful, right? Or I mean, we do know how the body works, but we don't have 100% assurance that there's not a probability that this person wouldn't thrive on that medication. So there could be all these unintended consequences with really great intentions. And how do we mitigate that? This is a huge, huge question that I hope all the brilliant minds that are creating AI are thinking about as we create them.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Now, Tamara, part of what you're doing actually, if I want to think about it, um, the way we work is changing. It's always has been changing, but I mean, because even the leaders in the market, whether from tech or other verticals also as well, they're talking about this paradigm shift that is happening now in the workforce. So, and we know, like, probably more and more people would be either doing, like, you know gig, will be in the gig economy, let's call it this way, or either they will be solopreneurs, right?
Billion
And
dollar businesses that are built by one person.
yeah, now when that would happen, no one knows. Like, it can be this year, it can be in 5 years, but you know every single signal, at least that I try to follow, is telling me, and this is, by the way, based on real discussions outside of the podcast and on the podcast, I can see this tendency of people who want this kind of freedom, and AI is allowing them to do so. Do you see what you're doing currently as enabler for how the future of work would look like?
I sure
And
hope.
in your opinion, how the future of work would look like?
Yeah, I definitely hope so. I mean, that is what I kind of preach, right? Is that the world is moving towards a different work culture, and that's why we have to do a financial industry that fits the new work culture. Um, Gig workers, and I call them gig workers, and we should probably come up with a better name for it. Um,
Right. I agree.
they're yeah, they I mean, it's such a wide percentage of the workforce, and it goes from your graphic designers to your Uber drivers to your CXOs, to your Etsy, shops, right? Like, it's huge, and it's growing, and it's some by choice and some by necessity, but I don't think that we're going back to the model of you have one job for 20 years, 30 years, and you retire there with a pension. The model now is you have several jobs that you choose, and you can live the lifestyle that you want to live, hopefully. Um, and the future of work is moving in that direction. You see more companies hiring 1099 employees, and now there's a real push and pull right now in the workforce of, do we bring people back into the office, or do we have to figure out this remote hybrid work situation? Because since COVID, people really do want to have a different working experience, right? Being called back into the office is something that people are doing begrudgingly. So that's gonna happen for a moment, but employers will have to figure out, in order to keep top talent, how to do some sort of hybrid, remote, nomadic experience. Um, so I see the future of work being something that's much more fluid, much more on the employee's terms than than the, corporations, and how they work and where they work. Um and I see it being, you have the kind of creative, you're gonna need the high level creative, um, empathetic people who can run multiple AI employees. And then you're also going to have the work, I talk about this a lot, which is like the workforce that works with their hands, the plumbers, the electricians. I mean, we have such a in the US, there's a lack of those positions right now, and those aren't the positions that AI will take over. So you're going to have a rise in these hands-on positions and jobs and companies, and then a rise in leaders who can maintain and lead AI employees.
So I know, like, it's not related to what you're doing, but because you just mentioned this,
Is that my
Tamara,
yeah.
um, it's related somehow, but I gotta tell you how, because just of what you mentioned. So AI replacing jobs, right? Which usually humans do. At the same time, we start to hear from multiple figures in the industry. I would not hide, like, Elon Musk is the main guy who talks about it all the time. I heard it from different people also as well. As well as the first time I heard it, it was on my podcast 3 years ago when no one was knew about it. I mean, it was known, but not at the mass scale, about universal basic income, and how this will like humans, of course they will work, but actually it will be optional kind of, or maybe you would go and do the thing that you really 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 enjoy and you will be paid for it. So in a world, and I'm being a little bit futuristic here, um in a world that you know AI is doing our jobs, and actually we're just doing enjoying this, our behavior when it comes to credit and how we consume and the need actually a credit score, how do you envision this in the future in a world where the majority of the workforce might be AI?
Well, so let me kind of answer your question in a way. Here's one thing that I know. I know that people really need and want a purpose in life. And purpose is what drives us. It drives us in our community, it drives us in our family, it drives us in our relationships. Is what is that purpose? What is that connection? What is it that makes me want to get up in the morning and be excited? And a lot of that is found in a job and what you can provide and do and challenge yourself towards. And so, where I ponder the question about universal income is how is it done in relationship to people's purpose? Because I don't see a situation where people thrive with universal income if they do not have a purpose. I don't see communities thriving without people having purpose. And so, a lot of the work that I've done in the foundations that I work with help with workforce development. And when someone has a job, their outlooks, their families, everything radically changes. And so that to me is something that I think unless we have the answer to what is someone's purpose and how do they carry that out, then I don't see universal income working.
So the answer is again, in if I understand this right, and I tend to agree with you here more, Tamara, because I don't think like people are not like created to just sit on a couch all day and do nothing, right? That would be very boring. So here comes to what we discussed a couple of minutes ago, which about the maybe the one man company or like one person company, right? And where you have your AI agents probably doing the repetitive tasks, the boring stuff, but you focus on you know what's more important. And this is, as we are almost coming to an end, you mentioned your love to startups, Tamara, and you mentioned the 0 to 1, and this is a, for people who doesn't still know, it's the very famous, term used mainly in Silicon Valley. Peter Thiel, he came up with it, like how to take a company from 0 to 1, meaning like from nothing and you become a monopoly. Um, how we can get, in your opinion, more people interested in this? Because to me, I'm not saying like everyone gonna be an entrepreneur, but somehow people need to understand that entrepreneurship is not just about building companies. It's not only about being the in the doom and gloom of the startup world, all things that we see. It's also about purpose. So how we can encourage more people, especially in the space you are in now, to try to get up with something and try to at least try their luck and see, can we build something which fulfill our purpose and be useful for humanity.
Yeah, I think it's about people changing their perspective on whether they have to be a CEO to start a business. Right? Um, I think the misconception is that in order to solve the problem that you wanna solve and to build a company, you have to be the CEO, because not everybody's built to be the CEO, right? Not everybody's built for that because the CEO is a much different sort of position, and
Right.
people have really incredible, unique skill sets. Doing this is like my circle and, like, the prongs coming off of the circle. And if you can understand what your unique skill set is and the problem you want to solve, then you surround yourself with people who can build a company. Not everyone has to build a company. Some people can just have a great idea. And if they can um, convince someone else who has a different skill set that complements theirs to join together with them, then you have a winning combination, right? I think what scares people off from starting a company is the idea that you have to that you, as the expert in something, have to then also build it. And not everybody is built for that. I'm super lucky. And I mean, I know that, right? Like my skill set is not building the AI agents. I have a CTO who's brilliant at that and wants to do it. My CTO does not want to get on calls with investors all day. That is the last thing she wants to do, right? Like, and so our skill sets complement each other, and we're able to build a company together.
I love that because first, like, I can't agree enough with you about you don't need to follow the title, the CEO, or like whatever you want to call it, founder only. You can still be working with someone and you are an entrepreneur, in my opinion. The second thing, and I think this is a very great combination, Tamara, when you have, I love startups like you, by the way. I'm a big fan. I was lucky to work with some startups in the past. They were scale ups, but for me, startups in at least the part of the world where I am. And the best thing that I've seen is when you have multiple founders where they exactly know how to divide responsibilities between themselves and give everyone the tasks which are doing perfectly, and then rely on the others to do the thing that usually we're not as good as in doing so. And in your case, you just describe it in a perfect way. Like, I know, like, as technical guys, they don't like to be sitting hearing about, you know, tell us about your burn rate, and tell us about your runway, and tell us about your business model, financial projections. So this is the last thing maybe a CTO would like to hear, but they like to build. And maybe from your side, like, you want to talk strategy, you want to talk about your vision and how you want to apply this. And this is the perfect combination. So this is a great example, Tamara, for any existing founder or to be founder. If he or she, you're listening to us today, this is, I think, one of the main takeaways for you today. Like, you don't have to master it all. Try to also do it in a partnership with someone, and you don't have to have the title CEO. Now, final question, Tamara. Any final thoughts you want to share with us, and where people can get in touch and learn more about you and the company?
Yeah, no, I love this conversation. I think that it's really important to talk about how you build technology and the thought process that goes behind it, not just the pie in the sky vision. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, partner with if there's a bank or financial institution that wants to partner with us, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Tamara Laine on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can go to our websites, empowerai.com. You can book a demo. And if you are a gig worker, you can go to empower.money and you'll get a special discount on 3 months of our platform for cash flow analysis.
Great. Thank you very much, Tamara. And by the way, for the audience, you don't need to rewind and hear where the links were. So I'm gonna put everything in the show notes. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting app, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll find the description. Again, Tamara, I know how busy things can get as a founder and CEO. So thank you very much for giving me the time today. I really appreciate it. And this is how I usually end my episodes. This is for the audience. If you just discovered this podcast, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, give me a favor, subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the loyal people who keep listening, who keep sending me their messages, thank you so much. You did fantastic job 2025, and you keeping doing fantastic job in 2026, keeping the podcast, I think now for the 56th or 57th week straight in the top 200 Apple Podcast charts. Of course, but as usual, I'm keep roaming different countries. So just today, we are recording this on the 16th of Jan. Probably you're listening or watching this by the end of this month. we were in two new countries. So we're in Croatia and we were in Denmark. So thank you very much for people there. I'm still waiting for my North American friends in the US and Canada. I want to see the podcast there also as well. So give us a shout, share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. And as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.